My name is John Krapp. I'm an associate professor of comparative literature at Hofstra University, where I have been teaching and writing for 20 years. It is my pleasure to welcome your participation in Lindenhurst Memorial Library's Big Read program. In this short podcast, I'd like to talk briefly about several strategies that you can use to get the most out of Leo Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is the featured text in this year's Big Read. When I teach a work of literature, especially to someone who may be completely unfamiliar with the text and is reading it for the first time, I like to talk about how we can find our way into the narrative so that even though we are in an unfamiliar landscape, we do not feel lost. The first thing we usually have in front of us is the title, and titles tend to matter a great deal in literature because they can be a way for the author to provide us with an immediate coordinate for entering a story. This is reflex for us. What's the book about? Look at the title. The problem is that sometimes it is difficult to know to what a title is referring. Looking at the titles of the texts collected in the Big Read, we see the very abstract Fahrenheit 451. It is highly unlikely that we happen to know that paper burns at that temperature, but even if we do, we can't really anticipate the relevance of this information to Bradbury's story until we start reading. A title like Christ in Concrete uses two words that are recognizable enough, but we don't often see these words together. The title is symbolic. But symbolic of what? Again, another title that is not as helpful when trying to find our feet in a text as it could have been if we are looking for certainty. Tolstoy is kinder to us. Unless he is trying to fool us, which, for several reasons that I will discuss in another podcast on Tolstoy the artist, he is not, his title is transparent and efficient. This narrative will recount the death of a man named Ivan Ilyich. What could be clearer? Should we have any doubts, these should be dispelled as we read the first few lines of the story and see one of Ivan Ilyich's colleagues exclaim, "Gentlemen, Ivan Ilyich is dead." You will feel an immediate sense of confidence. Then, if you are like me when I first read this text, you will get lost in the long Russian names. I have known people to give up on Russian fiction because they became overwhelmed trying to keep the characters straight. Perhaps the primary reason the names in Tolstoy's text can be daunting is because Russian names typically come in three parts. At the risk of oversimplifying a long, complex tradition, there's a first name and last name, more or less like we have a personal and family name in the English-speaking world, but there is also a middle name called a patronymic, which is derived from the name of a child's father. So Ivan Ilyich Golovin is Ivan Golovin, son of Ilyich. In polite society, he will be referred to by his first name and patronymic. His last name would not typically be used. There are only 9 significant characters in Tolstoy's novella: the 4 members of his immediate family, his daughter's fiancé, his servant, and several professional acquaintances. If you find it hard to follow the characters' names, why not write them down as they appear and make a little note after each name indicating who the character is? Cheat sheets are fine as you begin to negotiate a new literary world. When you get to Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, you'll see that the translator has provided a detailed family tree of all the novel's major characters because it is so easy to lose track of who is who. Getting back to Tolstoy, if you have trouble pronouncing the Russian names in your mind as you read, don't worry. As long as you accurately link the name to the character, I don't think it matters too much how that name sounds in your mind. Tolstoy's novella is about the death of Ivan Ilyich, and we learn that the character is already dead in the opening lines of the text. A quick flip through the pages indicates that the narrative is divided into 12 sections, and these sections divide the story into several distinct parts. I'd like to provide a quick summary overview of these sections, and then go back and suggest things to look for and to think about as you read the text. The first section presents the character's immediate reaction to Ivan Ilyich's death, including a scene in the drawing room of Ivan Ilyich's wife during his wake. Sections 2 and 3 chart Ivan Ilyich's early career success, his marriage, and his acquisition of professional power, material comfort, and status. Sections 4 and 5 introduce the circumstances of Ivan Ilyich's illness, his acknowledgement that the illness is serious, and his deteriorating relationship with his wife. Sections 6, 7, and 8 describe Ivan Ilyich's attempt to live with his illness as his quality of life and his marriage continue to decline. These sections also present the relationship that begins to develop between him and his servant. Sections 9, 10, and 11 show the dying Ivan Ilyich suffering with the pain of his disease and struggling with self-awareness as he tries to take stock of his life and the choices he has made. The final section 12 provides Ivan Ilyich with a last opportunity to find peace before he dies. There is nothing complex or even terribly provocative in the narrative line of Tolstoy's novella. Man gets sick, man suffers, man dies. But this text is one of our great books. Some critics place it among the greatest pieces of short fiction ever written. A fair question is why? In an earlier podcast on how to get the most out of great books, I suggested that one of the reasons certain literature ranks among the best that humans have produced is that it holds a mirror up to our lives and asks us to think about who we are, the choices we make, and our relationships to others. It engages us in the process of self-realization and self-becoming. When a text strikes us as familiar, it tends to resonate all the more powerfully with us. With this in mind, let's look more closely at the story that the narrator is telling. We can begin in section 1 with the reaction of Ivan Ilyich's colleagues to his death. How sincere is their sadness upon hearing the news? They seem as, if not more, concerned with how his death might either benefit or inconvenience them. These are his so-called friends, and yet they grumble at their obligation to behave decently and observe the proper social choreography that follows a colleague's death. Why is this? A few possibilities come to mind. Perhaps Ivan Ilyich was a bad person, one undeserving of more empathy and generosity, something we might learn as the story unfolds. Perhaps his colleagues are not decent men. Perhaps the society of these characters encourages this kind of reaction to the loss of a human life. We get a clue that there might be something to this last possibility when we see the reaction of Ivan Ilyich's own wife to his death. She tells Pyotr Ivanovich that she can't understand how she endured her husband's last days. She's disturbingly narcissistic, concerned primarily with herself, as the other characters are first concerned with themselves. Lost in all of this is Ivan Ilyich. The narrator is giving us a picture of a world where people are alarmingly selfish, and I think we are also challenged to ask ourselves whether this world bears any resemblance to our own. If this seems a leap, observe what happens in the next sections before Ivan Ilyich falls ill. His early life is described by the narrator in the first sentence of section 2 as most simple and ordinary and most terrible. These words are not usually linked together. They cue us to look carefully at the details of his early life and marriage to understand why the narrator might describe a simple, ordinary life as most terrible. Of this period of his life, we learn that Ivan Ilyich was capable, cheerful, aspired to social success, and behaved in a manner that would most likely guarantee it. As we read these sections, we think about the way that the narrator describes this society. What are its values? What does it most desire? What kinds of people negotiate it most successfully? Was Ivan Ilyich one of these people? The answer to this last question is yes. He most certainly achieved success. A good job, a wife, respectable lodgings with beautiful things. What kind of character does he exhibit and develop in pursuit of these social and economic fortunes? Since we are still looking for an explanation for why his most intimate circle responded to his death as it did, we don't want to neglect his relationship with his wife. The narrator tells us that the attitude to domestic life worked out by Ivan Ilyich made him almost impervious to her peevishness. He detaches, she grows resentful. Husband and wife are not connected. Moreover, they do not value each other. As we read, we should not fail to appreciate the narrator's presentation of the emotional dynamics and psychological consequences of a failed marriage. We learn what Ivan Ilyich does value in section 3. He values things, as indicated by the meticulous care he puts into furnishing his lodgings. The narrator is sharpening his portrait of this society. It is one where the value of things is greater than the value of other people and one's relationships with them. We learn that one of Ivan Ilyich's greatest professional talents is the ability to discard the human when official business requires. This is one of the keys to his success. But because the novella begins with the other characters' judgments on Ivan Ilyich's life, we already know that he pays a steep price for it. The trick to the narrator's story is that Ivan Ilyich does not realize that he is paying this price until he is well into his illness, when it may be too late to regain what he has sacrificed. He is oblivious to the cost of his success because he uncritically accepts the values of the society he desires and the conduct necessary to acquire it. I suspect that many of us behave, at one point or another in our lives, exactly the same way. We accept the ideas we are born into because we believe they will benefit us, and we never really question whether they are worth our investment until they begin to fail us. As Ivan Ilyich's health fails him, so does his confidence in the choices he has made throughout his life. The primary catalyst of Ivan Ilyich's process of self-reflection that dominates the last third of the narrative is the care he receives from his servant, Gerasim. Gerasim's empathy teaches Ivan Ilyich something crucial, and it is worth pausing at this point in the novella to think about the way that the servant's words and behavior influence the dying man. The narrator does not want us to miss this, which is why he intersperses the Gerasim scenes with the moments when Ivan Ilyich must deal with his wife and daughter, the two characters who continue to express the values of Ivan Ilyich's social world and its material interests. As Ivan Ilyich continues to reflect on his life, he experiences a range of thoughts and emotions, but in general, he resists judging the choices he has made as long as he can, and then, when he finally begins to render judgment, we are told that his moral sufferings are his chief torment. They have overwhelmed his physical pain and lead him to ask himself, what if my whole life, my conscious life, has indeed been not right? When he sees his family the next morning, he is conscious of the fact that all that he had lived by was a terrible, vast deception, concealing both life and death. The final section of the text elaborates on Ivan Ilyich's insight, and at the moment of his death provides a final reflection on his question on the meaning of his life, an answer to which readers have historically responded with mixed approval. I have no interest in making a case for or against Ivan Ilyich's final moment of self-realization and his summing up of the meaning of his life. For me, Ivan Ilyich's answer is far less important than the question that precedes it in his moment of despair. The question is the philosophical centerpiece of the narrative. It is the question that none of us ever wants to have to ask. What if my whole life has not been right, has been a lie? Tolstoy's novella shows us how one man gets to that terrible point. Is Tolstoy then promoting the idea that a life that prioritizes material things and status over successful, intimate human relationships is doomed? Maybe. But we must remember that Tolstoy is not the narrator, and this is a work of fiction. The narrator could very well be condemning a materialistic life, but if our personal values compel us to reject the validity of such a conclusion, we can still profit from the novella by extracting a broader message from it. The death of Ivan Ilyich encourages us to be critical of the world around us, to question the validity of the societal norms that tell us how we should think and act if we want to be happy and successful. We must learn to think and choose for ourselves, because if we do not, then someone else is thinking and choosing for us. Such a life could work out. On the other hand, Ivan Ilyich learns that sometimes we live uncritically at our peril, and in his case, the knowledge comes too late. But as soon as we open ourselves to new ways of thinking about and acting into the world, we can increase the likelihood that we will be in a position to live life on our own terms. And we can even better appreciate the enduring value of great books like the ones collected in The Big Read.